of 2 degrees will be threatened by catastrophic consequences that future generations may have to pay for with their own lives. First of all, it is essential to emit less climate-damaging CO2. Filtering CO2 from the air is another approach, of course, especially if the CO2 would then be converted into such a fantastic end product, climate-neutral fuel. And this is exactly what the innovative technology of a Canadian company is supposed to do. A warm welcome to Clixoom Science Fiction. Subscribe to the channel to avoid missing any of our new videos.
1, 2.
Climate change is within our grasp. Just take a look outside and remember the summer of the century, as many people already call it. By now it is also clear that global warming must be limited to 2 or even better 1.5 degrees. But our future looks quite different at the moment. If we continue like this, it could soon be up to 4 degrees warmer, and that would have catastrophic consequences, as you can imagine. Droughts, rising sea levels and deserts in regions where food can still be grown today. The problem is simple. Far too many fossil fuels are used and CO2 can remain in the atmosphere for thousands of years. Even if we were to pull the emergency brakes right now, it might already be too late. And this is precisely why research teams around the world are working on a so-called negative emission technologies, NET, in which the climate-damaging CO2 is actively removed from the atmosphere. This is also the case with the Canadian company Carbon Engineering, whose plant has been capturing carbon dioxide for 3 years now. It currently manages 1 ton per day. As you may know, this is not easy. The problem is that the CO2 content of the air is 0.04%, even though it has almost doubled recently. But it is possible. A test facility near Zurich, for example, shows this. However, the problems remain. The filtering process is extremely expensive and the greenhouse gas filtered from the air is also extremely undesirable. So what to do with it other than store it underground? The Canadians' idea is almost too good to be true. They turn CO2 into something valuable, a climate-neutral fuel, without oil wells and drilling platforms. Commenting on the new technology, one of the CEOs of the Canadian company, Steve Oldham, said, "When we drive a car, CO2 is released, but old CO2 is released and no new CO2 is added to the atmosphere. The whole process is not completely reinvented, but is already being used by oil companies. But the way the Canadian company implements it, it is newly combined and thus optimized." Put simply, it works like this. The air is captured by huge fans and the CO2 is absorbed by a hydroxide solution. This liquid is then converted into pure CO2, which can be processed into gasoline or diesel together with hydrogen, and this with relatively little energy input. And the whole thing not only works in practice, but was also described in detail by the founder and at the same time Harvard professor in a trade journal. The costs per ton of filtered CO2 are therefore just under $100, a great development because in the beginning it was $300. In the future, a factory could filter up to 1 million tons of CO2 out of the air every year. This is equivalent to the annual output of 250,000 cars. The whole thing could have a real future. Bill Gates is not investing in the Canadian company for nothing, which by the way has already scored quite successfully in a major climate competition. The founders of Carbon Engineering are optimistic that their new technology will help the climate. CEO David Keith: "The first thing we should do is to slow down carbon dioxide emissions. It is cheaper not to emit CO2 in the first place than to collect it again, but if we cannot do that, we have to think about large-scale capture of CO2. By the way, he is also a developer who has developed numerous ideas in the field of geoengineering. For example, to produce artificial clouds to reduce solar radiation, or to fertilize the oceans with iron so that algae that eat CO2 multiply. In comparison, his Canadian company's concept sounds far more insane and could ultimately save everyone's ass. Oopsie. Click here to continue with Ice Age in Europe. Will the Gulf Stream come to a standstill? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel here so you